Everyone in the ballroom expected the waitress to lose her job, but no one imagined that one accidental spill would uncover something far more valuable than a diamond. The grand ballroom of the Ashcroft Hotel shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers that reflected warm golden light across polished marble floors, while a string quartet filled the air with soft classical music, and the city's wealthiest guests drifted from table to table carrying sparkling glasses of imported wine. Olivia Brooks moved quietly among them with practiced grace, balancing a silver serving tray despite the exhaustion hidden behind her calm smile. At 27 years old, she had learned that invisible people survived longer than noticeable ones. She worked double shifts 6 days a week, walked nearly 8 miles every day inside the hotel, and sent most of her paycheck home to help her grandmother keep a modest apartment on the south side of Chicago. Tonight was different from every other shift because the hotel's most exclusive private gala had brought together influential business leaders, politicians, philanthropists, and one guest whose name everyone spoke with lowered voices. Adrian Moretti entered the ballroom without announcing himself, yet conversations softened the moment he appeared. Standing over 6 feet tall in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, he carried himself with quiet confidence rather than arrogance. His expression remained unreadable as he greeted guests with brief nods, never lingering long enough for meaningless conversation. People respected him because he rarely raised his voice, and because every decision he made seemed deliberate. Olivia only knew him as another important guest whose table required flawless service. She took a slow breath, adjusted her apron, and approached with a fresh bottle of vintage red wine. As she reached his table, another server hurried behind her carrying a towering tray of desserts. Their shoulders brushed for only an instant. The unexpected contact shifted Olivia's balance just enough for the bottle to tilt. A stream of deep crimson wine splashed across Adrian's immaculate suit jacket before anyone could react. The room froze. Forks stopped halfway to plates. The quartet stumbled into silence. Every pair of eyes turned toward the young waitress whose face had gone completely pale. Olivia's heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. "I'm so sorry," she whispered immediately, reaching instinctively for a linen napkin before stopping herself, afraid of making the expensive fabric even worse. The restaurant manager rushed across the ballroom with panic written across his face, already apologizing before he even reached the table. Several nearby guests exchanged knowing looks, certain they were witnessing the end of a waitress's career. One woman quietly muttered that accidents like this happened when hotels hired people who didn't belong in rooms like these. Olivia lowered her eyes, refusing to defend herself because experience had taught her that explanations rarely changed minds. She simply waited for the words that would end her employment. Adrian looked down at the stain for several seconds before lifting his eyes to meet hers. Instead of anger, there was only careful observation, as though he were studying something no one else had noticed. "Are you hurt?" he asked calmly. The unexpected question left Olivia speechless. She blinked once, uncertain she had heard correctly. "No, sir," she answered softly. Adrian gave a slight nod, accepted a clean napkin from another server, and gently dabbed the jacket himself. "Then accidents happen," he said in an even voice before taking his seat, as if nothing remarkable had occurred. Relief swept through the ballroom, yet confusion quickly replaced it. The manager apologized repeatedly while promising immediate dry cleaning and compensation, but Adrian simply dismissed the concern with a polite gesture. Olivia quietly stepped away, her hands still trembling beneath the serving tray, unable to understand why the most intimidating man in the room had shown her the kindness no one else expected. She finished the remainder of her shift with the memory replaying in her mind, never realizing that the night had only begun to reveal its greatest surprise. Olivia remained unusually quiet as the final guests drifted out of the ballroom and the hotel staff began restoring the elegant room to its flawless appearance. Empty wine glasses disappeared into rolling carts, white tablecloths were replaced, and the music that had filled the evening slowly faded into silence. She replayed every second of the accident in her mind, still unable to understand why Adrian Moretti had responded with calm instead of humiliation. Every coworker had expected an explosion of anger, and several were still whispering about it while folding napkins and stacking silverware. One server insisted that powerful men often hid their disappointment until later, while another quietly warned Olivia to expect a phone call from management before the week ended. Olivia simply smiled politely and continued working because worrying never changed tomorrow. After midnight, she carried the last tray into the employee break room, removed the black apron she had worn throughout the evening, and hung it over the back of a chair before reaching into the pocket for the small notebook where she tracked every dollar she earned. Instead of paper, her fingers touched something cold, perfectly smooth, and unexpectedly heavy. Confused, she slowly pulled out a small velvet jewelry box that she had never seen before. Her heartbeat immediately quickened. The box was elegant, dark blue, and tied with a thin silver ribbon. Looking around to make sure no one was watching, she carefully opened the lid. Resting inside was a breathtaking diamond ring whose brilliance reflected the fluorescent lights into tiny stars across the room. Olivia stared without breathing. She knew almost nothing about expensive jewelry, yet even she could tell this was worth far more money than she could earn in many years. Her first thought was not excitement, but fear. Someone would eventually realize it was missing. If it had somehow ended up inside her apron pocket, who would believe such an impossible explanation? She quickly closed the box and searched every pocket again, hoping there was another clue, but there was nothing except her notebook and a few folded receipts from the employee cafeteria. She sat alone for several minutes, trying to remember every moment of the evening. Had another server accidentally slipped it into her apron? Had a guest mistaken her pocket for a coat check? Or had someone deliberately hidden it there? None of the possibilities made sense. She considered taking it directly to hotel security, but another thought stopped her. If the ring belonged to one of the influential guests from the gala, simply discovering it in her possession could instantly make her the primary suspect. Rumors spread quickly in places where wealthy people expected perfection, and she had spent years building a reputation for honesty that could disappear in a single misunderstanding. Carefully placing the jewelry box back into her apron pocket, Olivia locked her employee locker, signed out for the night, and stepped into the cool Chicago air. The streets were almost empty, illuminated by rows of amber streetlights reflecting across sidewalks still damp from an earlier rain. She boarded the last city bus home, holding the apron tightly on her lap for the entire ride, as if letting it out of her sight for even a second would invite disaster. Every bump in the road seemed louder than usual. Every passing stranger appeared suspicious, and every possibility raced through her imagination. By the time she reached her small apartment, sleep felt impossible. She placed the velvet box on her kitchen table, stared at it beneath the soft glow of a single lamp, and finally whispered the only promise that allowed her heart to settle. No matter how difficult tomorrow became, she would find the rightful owner and return it exactly as she had found it, because some things were worth far more than money, and she refused to lose herself over something that had never belonged to her in the first place. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the Ashcroft Hotel as Olivia arrived nearly an hour before her shift began, carrying the neatly folded apron inside a plain canvas bag that never left her side. She had barely slept, and the diamond ring had occupied every quiet moment of the night, not because she dreamed of keeping it, but because she feared how easily the truth could be mistaken for a lie. The city outside continued with its ordinary rhythm as taxis stopped beneath the hotel entrance and office workers hurried along crowded sidewalks carrying coffee cups, completely unaware that a single piece of jewelry had become the center of one young woman's conscience. Olivia signed in, changed into her uniform, and walked directly toward the security office before stopping halfway down the hallway. Through the open doorway, she saw two supervisors speaking with an anxious guest about a misplaced designer watch. The guest insisted that someone on the hotel staff must have taken it, while one supervisor patiently explained that every employee would cooperate with the search. Olivia quietly stepped back before anyone noticed her. The scene confirmed the fear she had carried since midnight. If she walked into that office holding a diamond ring without any explanation anyone could verify, suspicion would naturally fall upon her first. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a slow breath, and remembered the calm expression on Adrian Moretti's face after the accident. He had listened before judging. Perhaps he would do the same again. Throughout the morning, she completed her duties with careful precision, greeting guests, refilling coffee cups, and delivering breakfast plates. Yet her attention constantly drifted toward the private dining room where Adrian had scheduled a business breakfast. Shortly after 10 o'clock, she finally saw him crossing the lobby with two associates dressed in tailored suits. They spoke quietly among themselves while hotel staff respectfully stepped aside to clear their path. Olivia's pulse quickened. She tightened her grip on the canvas bag and reminded herself that honesty required courage, especially when fear offered easier choices. As the meeting concluded, Adrian remained alone near one of the large windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Olivia approached slowly until she stood several feet away. He recognized her almost immediately and offered the same composed expression she remembered from the previous evening. "Good morning," he said politely. "How is the uniform?" The unexpected touch of humor eased her nerves for just an instant. "Much cleaner than your jacket." She replied with an embarrassed smile before becoming serious again. She carefully placed the canvas bag on a nearby table, removed the velvet jewelry box, and held it with both hands. "I believe this may belong to you," she said quietly. Adrian looked at the box without reaching for it. Instead, he studied Olivia's face as though searching for something deeper than words. "Where did you find it?" he asked. She explained every detail exactly as it had happened, beginning with the end of her shift, the discovery inside her apron pocket, and her decision to bring it back personally because she did not want anyone else to misunderstand what had happened. She did not exaggerate, defend herself, or ask for recognition. She simply told the truth. The silence that followed seemed to stretch across the entire lobby. Finally, Adrian opened the box. The diamond caught the morning sunlight, sending tiny reflections across the polished floor. For the first time since Olivia had met him, the controlled expression on his face softened almost imperceptibly. He closed the box with great care, looked back at the young waitress standing before him, and realized that in a world where trust had become increasingly rare, the greatest surprise was not that the ring had been found, but that someone had chosen integrity when no one would have known otherwise. Adrian held the velvet box in his hands for several quiet moments before carefully closing the lid, and although his expression remained controlled, something behind his steady eyes had unmistakably changed. The bustling hotel lobby continued around them as guests checked in, luggage carts rolled across the polished marble floor, and conversations blended into a gentle hum. Yet for Adrian, it seemed as though time had slowed. Olivia waited respectfully without expecting praise or reward. She had only come to return what was never hers. Finally, Adrian looked at her and spoke in a calm voice that carried neither suspicion nor surprise. "Do you know what this ring is?" Olivia shook her head. "No, sir. I only knew it belonged to someone, and I wanted to make sure it found its way back." Adrian glanced once more at the diamond. Before answering, "My mother wore this ring every day for more than 30 years. She believed that people revealed their true character when nobody was watching." His words were quiet, but they carried a weight that immediately captured Olivia's attention. He continued by explaining that after his mother's passing, the ring had become the most valuable possession he owned, not because of its extraordinary price, but because it reminded him of the woman who had taught him that respect could never be purchased. The previous evening, he had removed it for only a brief moment while washing his hands before dinner, placing the small jewelry box inside the pocket of his folded dinner jacket. During the confusion after the wine spill, several employees had hurried to clean the jacket and replace it with another one prepared by hotel staff. Somewhere amid the rushed movements, the velvet box had accidentally slipped into Olivia's apron pocket without anyone noticing. Adrian admitted that he had not realized it was missing until late that night, and by then he had quietly instructed his assistants to retrace every step before making any public report. He refused to accuse anyone without evidence because he had seen too many innocent people suffer from assumptions. Olivia listened carefully, relieved that the mystery finally made sense. She smiled softly and said she was grateful the ring had found its way home. Adrian studied her for another long moment. Most people he encountered spoke differently when they believed they might gain something. They complimented him too quickly, agreed too easily, or tried to impress him with carefully chosen words. Olivia had done none of those things. She had simply returned a priceless family heirloom without asking for recognition, money, or even reassurance that she would not be blamed. That kind of honesty was becoming increasingly rare. Before Olivia could excuse herself and return to work, Adrian asked one final question. What made you decide to bring it directly to me? She answered without hesitation. Because I would want someone to do the same for my family if they had lost something they loved. The simplicity of her response lingered between them. Adrian slowly nodded, not because the answer was unexpected, but because it reminded him of a way of thinking he had not encountered in many years. As Olivia quietly returned to the dining room and resumed serving guests with the same quiet professionalism she showed every day, Adrian remained near the window overlooking the Chicago skyline. For the first time in a very long while, his attention drifted away from contracts, investments, and schedules. Instead, he found himself thinking about a young waitress who had every opportunity to change her own life with one silent decision, yet had chosen integrity instead. Without saying a word to anyone else, Adrian reached into his jacket, removed a small notebook, and wrote only one name before closing it again. Olivia Brooks. It was not the end of a story. To him, it felt like the beginning of an answer he had not realized he had been searching for. The following morning, Adrian's routine appeared unchanged to everyone around him, yet a quiet curiosity had settled into his thoughts that refused to disappear. Meetings filled his calendar from sunrise until late afternoon. Financial reports covered the conference table inside his downtown office, and senior executives waited for decisions that affected millions of dollars. But between every discussion, his mind drifted back to the young waitress whose honesty had challenged assumptions he had accepted for years. Before leaving the office that evening, he asked his longtime assistant, Daniel Harper, to look into Olivia Brooks. There was no urgency in his voice and no hidden agenda. "Do not disturb her," Adrian said calmly. "I only want to know who she is when nobody is watching." Daniel understood immediately. Within several days, small pieces of Olivia's ordinary life quietly came together. She had never received a complaint from a guest in nearly 5 years at the Ashcroft Hotel. She often volunteered to cover extra shifts when coworkers faced family emergencies. She declined generous tips whenever customers accidentally handed her more money than intended, always returning the difference with the same polite smile. Outside work, her life was even simpler than Adrian expected. She lived in a modest apartment with her elderly grandmother, Margaret Brooks, whose arthritis made everyday tasks increasingly difficult. Every Tuesday after work, Olivia stopped at a neighborhood grocery store, carefully comparing prices before buying fresh vegetables, milk, and medication. On weekends, she volunteered at a local community kitchen where she prepared meals for families experiencing difficult times, never mentioning her own financial struggles. Daniel even learned that several months earlier, Olivia had quietly paid for a stranger's bus ticket after overhearing that he could not afford to visit his daughter in the hospital. She had never spoken about it again because she believed kindness lost its meaning when performed for recognition. Adrian listened without interrupting as Daniel summarized each discovery. None of the information described extraordinary achievements, famous awards, or remarkable success. Instead, every detail revealed quiet consistency. Olivia treated every person with the same respect, whether they wore expensive business suits or worn work jackets. That simple pattern impressed Adrian more than dramatic acts of generosity ever could. Later that afternoon, Adrian found himself driving past the community kitchen after another meeting nearby. He remained inside the back seat of his car while watching through the window as volunteers prepared dinner trays. Among them, he immediately recognized Olivia wearing a simple apron instead of the elegant hotel uniform. She laughed warmly with an elderly volunteer while carefully arranging food onto paper plates, greeting every visitor with genuine patience that appeared effortless rather than practiced. Children smiled when she handed them dessert, and older guests thanked her by name. No cameras recorded the moment. No reporters stood outside. There was no audience to applaud her compassion. She behaved exactly as Daniel had described because this was simply who she was. Adrian quietly asked his driver to continue without announcing their presence. As the car pulled away from the curb, he looked once more through the rear window and realized something unexpected. For years, he had measured people by influence, negotiation, and achievement because those were the rules of the world he understood. Yet the woman who had returned his mother's ring possessed a different kind of strength entirely, one that asked for nothing and quietly changed the lives of everyone fortunate enough to cross her path. That evening, Adrian opened the small notebook once again beneath the warm light of his study, looked at Olivia's name written across the page, and for the first time in many years added a second line beneath it. Find a way to protect what the world too often overlooks. Nearly 2 weeks passed before Adrian made another appearance at the Ashcroft Hotel, and during that time Olivia slowly convinced herself that their brief conversation had simply been the conclusion of an unusual misunderstanding. Life settled back into familiar routines filled with early mornings, long shifts, and evenings spent caring for her grandmother. She never spoke about the diamond ring to anyone because she believed some moments were meant to remain private. The hotel staff, however, had not forgotten the incident. Rumors still drifted through the employee lounge whenever a slow afternoon created space for conversation. Some insisted the influential businessman must have quietly compensated Olivia with a generous reward. Others claimed she had been extraordinarily lucky to avoid losing her job after spilling wine during such an important event. Olivia never corrected them. She simply smiled politely and returned to her work because the truth required no audience. On Friday evening, the hotel prepared for another distinguished charity banquet attended by civic leaders, business executives, and local organizations raising money for children's education programs throughout Chicago. Every detail received careful attention, from the polished silverware to the fresh floral arrangements placed across the ballroom. Olivia moved gracefully between tables, greeting guests with the same quiet professionalism she offered everyone, never expecting that the evening would become another turning point. Shortly before the keynote presentation began, Adrian entered the ballroom once again. This time his arrival drew respectful smiles instead of hushed curiosity because many of the guests already knew him personally. Olivia noticed him only briefly while carrying a tray of sparkling water, then continued working without interrupting his conversations. Adrian noticed something different. Although several guests recognized Olivia from the previous gala, not one of them acknowledged the integrity she had demonstrated. Instead, she remained invisible to nearly everyone in the room despite the remarkable decision she had made. As dinner concluded, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage and thanked the sponsors whose contributions had funded hundreds of student scholarships. Before introducing the final speaker, Adrian quietly approached the podium and requested a brief moment. The room immediately settled into attentive silence. Standing beneath the warm lights, Adrian looked across the audience before his eyes found Olivia near the back of the ballroom. "Before we celebrate generosity tonight," he began calmly, "I believe someone deserves recognition for an act that will never appear in a newspaper." Confused guests exchanged curious glances while Olivia froze in place, certain he could not possibly be referring to her. Adrian continued by describing how an employee had recently returned something of extraordinary personal value without expecting payment, praise, or even assurance that she would be believed. He never mentioned the diamond itself or its monetary worth. Instead, he spoke about honesty, character, and the quiet choices that revealed who people truly were. Then he invited Olivia to join him at the front of the ballroom. Her heart raced as every eye followed her careful steps across the polished floor. Embarrassed by the unexpected attention, she stopped beside Adrian and looked toward the audience with gentle uncertainty. Adrian smiled respectfully before addressing the guests one final time. "We spend much of our lives measuring success by accomplishments, titles, and possessions," he said. "But character is measured differently. Character reveals itself when doing the right thing offers no reward." The ballroom remained completely silent. Several guests who had dismissed Olivia only days earlier now watched her with newfound respect, while the hotel manager stood proudly near the entrance. Adrian thanked Olivia sincerely for reminding him that integrity still existed in everyday people whose names rarely appeared in headlines. As warm applause gradually filled the room, Olivia felt something she had not expected. The recognition mattered far less than knowing her honesty had encouraged others to believe that simple acts of decency still had the power to change how an entire room looked at one ordinary waitress. The applause gradually faded, but the effect of that evening lingered long after the last guest had left the ballroom. Olivia returned to clearing tables with the same quiet focus she had shown every day before the unexpected recognition, determined not to let a few kind words change the way she viewed herself. Several co-workers congratulated her sincerely, while others admitted they had judged her too quickly after the accident with the wine. Olivia accepted every apology with grace because holding on to resentment had never made anyone's future brighter. She believed that people deserved the opportunity to become better once they understood the truth. Adrian, however, left the hotel carrying something far more significant than satisfaction. During the drive home through downtown Chicago, he found himself reflecting on how easily an entire room had changed its opinion of one person simply because someone with influence had spoken. The realization unsettled him. Olivia had possessed integrity before the applause, before the recognition, and before anyone important had acknowledged her. The only thing that had changed was the willingness of others to notice it. That thought remained with him over the following days. Meanwhile, Olivia continued living the same modest life. Every morning, she helped her grandmother prepare breakfast before taking the city train to work. Every evening, she stopped by the neighborhood grocery store, greeted familiar cashiers by name, and carried reusable bags filled with carefully planned meals back to their apartment. Nothing about her daily routine reflected the attention she had recently received. She still volunteered at the community kitchen every Saturday, still smiled at strangers who needed encouragement, and still believed that kindness should never depend upon recognition. One rainy afternoon, as guests hurried into the hotel seeking shelter from the storm, Olivia noticed an elderly man struggling to carry several heavy shopping bags near the entrance. Without hesitation, she stepped outside beneath the pouring rain, held the hotel umbrella above him, and helped carry the groceries to the nearby bus stop before quietly returning to work with damp sleeves and rainwater dripping from her uniform. She never realized that Adrian had witnessed the entire moment while sitting inside a nearby car waiting for a business associate. He watched through the rain-speckled window as Olivia laughed gently with the grateful stranger before walking back toward the hotel without expecting thanks. When she disappeared through the revolving doors, Adrian remained silent for several moments. Daniel, sitting beside him, finally spoke. "She does not seem to know anyone is watching." Adrian smiled faintly. "That is exactly why it matters." A few days later, Adrian requested a private meeting with the executive board of one of his charitable foundations. Instead of discussing another high-profile fundraising gala, he proposed expanding their scholarship program to include hospitality workers who wanted to continue their education but lacked financial opportunity. He insisted that recommendations should be based on demonstrated character and consistent service rather than social connections or public recognition. The board members were surprised by the unusual proposal, yet Adrian explained that communities became stronger when ordinary acts of honesty were valued just as highly as extraordinary achievements. Although he never mentioned Olivia by name during the meeting, everyone noticed a quiet conviction in his voice that had not been present before. Across the city, completely unaware of the conversations unfolding because of her example, Olivia finished another long shift and walked home beneath clearing skies as the evening sun reflected across rain-soaked streets. She believed life had already returned to normal, never imagining that her simple choices had begun creating opportunities not only for herself, but for countless people she would probably never meet. Sometimes the greatest changes did not begin with grand speeches or dramatic victories. Sometimes they began with one person quietly choosing honesty again and again until someone finally decided that such goodness deserved to shape the future instead of remaining invisible. Autumn arrived quietly in Chicago, painting the trees along neighborhood streets with shades of amber and crimson, while cool morning air reminded everyone that another season had begun. Olivia continued walking through life with the same humble rhythm that had guided her for years, never imagining that the small decisions she made each day had become part of a much larger story. The scholarship initiative Adrian had proposed several weeks earlier moved forward with overwhelming support, and community organizations throughout the city began encouraging hardworking hospitality employees to apply. Olivia heard brief conversations about the program from coworkers during lunch breaks, but never considered submitting an application herself. She believed there were always others who needed opportunities more than she did. Her greatest concern remained caring for her grandmother and doing her work with honesty. One afternoon, the hotel manager approached Olivia after her shift and handed her a cream-colored envelope bearing the seal of the Moretti Foundation. Assuming it had been delivered by mistake, she politely tried to return it, but the manager smiled warmly and assured her that it had been addressed specifically to her. Olivia waited until she arrived home before opening the envelope at the small kitchen table where she and her grandmother shared dinner every evening. Inside, she found a handwritten letter from Adrian. The message was simple, respectful, and surprisingly personal. He thanked her once again for reminding him that integrity still existed in everyday life and explained that the foundation had created a new educational scholarship for hospitality professionals whose character reflected consistent service to others. Rather than offering charity, the program invested in people who had already demonstrated the values capable of strengthening entire communities. At the bottom of the letter, Adrian had written one final sentence in his own handwriting. I hope you will allow yourself the same opportunity you have always wished for others. Olivia read the letter twice before quietly placing it back inside the envelope. She had dreamed for years about studying hotel management, believing that education could someday allow her to supervise teams, mentor young employees, and provide greater stability for her grandmother. Financial reality had always placed that dream beyond reach. She looked across the table toward Margaret, who smiled gently before speaking words Olivia would remember for the rest of her life. Sometimes accepting help is another way of honoring the kindness you have already given. Several days later, Olivia attended a small meeting at the foundation offices, expecting a formal interview alongside dozens of applicants. Instead, she found a welcoming room where educators, community leaders, and previous scholarship recipients shared stories about perseverance, responsibility, and service. Adrian arrived quietly near the end of the gathering without any special introduction. He greeted every participant individually before stopping beside Olivia. This opportunity was never created because you returned a ring, he said softly. It exists because you showed that character should open doors just as much as talent. Olivia thanked him sincerely, but admitted she felt uncertain whether she deserved such confidence. Adrian smiled with quiet certainty. People often wait until someone becomes successful before believing in them. I think belief should come first. Those words settled deeply into Olivia's heart. As she left the building that afternoon, carrying the application materials beneath her arm, the Chicago skyline stretched brightly beneath clear blue skies, and for the first time in many years she allowed herself to imagine a future that reached beyond surviving one paycheck at a time. She still intended to work every shift with the same dedication as before, still planned to volunteer every Saturday, and still expected nothing life did not honestly provide. Yet somewhere between the hotel ballroom, a forgotten diamond ring, and one man's willingness to recognize quiet integrity, a new path had begun to unfold, built not upon fortune or influence, but upon trust patiently earned through ordinary acts that had never sought recognition. 6 months later, the first scholarship ceremony organized by the Moretti Foundation filled a historic auditorium in downtown Chicago with students, educators, hospitality workers, and families whose lives had been shaped by perseverance rather than privilege. Olivia Brooks sat quietly among the recipients wearing a simple navy dress that her grandmother had carefully pressed the night before. Nothing about her appearance suggested the remarkable journey that had brought her there, yet everyone who had come to know her understood that the greatest qualities she possessed could never be measured by clothing or titles. She had continued working at the Ashcroft Hotel while attending evening classes in hospitality management, balancing long workdays with demanding coursework without ever giving up her Saturday volunteer shifts at the community kitchen. Her classmates admired her discipline, her professors respected her curiosity, and her coworkers often found themselves encouraged simply by watching her greet each day with quiet determination. Margaret's health had gradually improved thanks to consistent medical care, and although life remained modest, their apartment had become filled with something that had once seemed impossible: hope. Adrian arrived shortly before the ceremony began and chose a seat among the audience instead of the front row reserved for distinguished donors. When organizers invited him to speak, he accepted only after insisting that the students themselves should remain the true focus of the evening. Standing before the audience, he looked across the room and recognized many faces shaped by years of sacrifice, responsibility, and quiet resilience. Every community becomes stronger, he said calmly, when character receives the same opportunity that talent receives. Success should never belong only to those who begin life with advantages. Sometimes the people who quietly serve others every day are already leading by example long before anyone notices. As the ceremony continued, Olivia's name was called to receive recognition for outstanding service and academic excellence. She walked onto the stage with the same humble composure she had shown on the evening she accidentally spilled wine at the hotel months earlier. Adrian handed her the certificate with a respectful smile before reaching into his jacket pocket and removing the familiar velvet jewelry box. The audience watched with quiet curiosity as he opened it for only a brief moment, allowing the diamond ring to catch the warm stage lights before closing it once again. "My mother believed this ring represented trust," he said softly, so only Olivia could hear. "You reminded me that trust still exists because people like you protect it every day." He returned the box to his pocket, not as a gift to be transferred, but as a symbol of a lesson that would remain with both of them for the rest of their lives. Olivia smiled gratefully, understanding that the greatest reward had never been the ring itself or even the scholarship. It was knowing that one honest decision had quietly changed another person's understanding of what truly mattered. After the ceremony ended, families gathered for photographs while students celebrated new beginnings. Adrian slipped away without seeking attention, leaving others to enjoy the moment they had earned. Olivia stepped outside into the cool evening air beside her grandmother, looking across the Chicago skyline, glowing beneath the setting sun. The journey that had begun with an unexpected accident had never been about wealth, influence, or remarkable luck. It had always been about ordinary integrity, choosing the harder path when no one was watching. As they walked toward home together, the city continued around them exactly as it always had. Yet somewhere within countless unseen moments of everyday life, another person would choose honesty over convenience, kindness over recognition, and dignity over personal gain. And on that quiet evening, the world remembered that the most valuable treasures are never the ones hidden inside velvet boxes, but the character carried within an honest heart.